Hello everyone and welcome to my 100-day project, day 12. We are on the second day of watercolor, and bear with me, my voice is a little bit scratchy. I'm a little bit under the weather today and I've got a bit of a cough, so bear with me as I go through this voiceover. But I'm just reminded of huge props to watercolorists. This is a really, really fun medium to work with, and there are definitely things to consider, as with every medium. But the more I'm doing these pieces, the more I'm reminded of what each medium asks for. So I was looking this morning through some pictures with my daughter. We were just looking, how things show up in your feed, and I came across this picture of us from a few years ago. It was a picture I took of her and I on a hike, and it's our shadow. And I thought, what a fun thing to paint today. Just simple shapes, deceptively simple. And I thought, I'm not feeling super great, so let's just do something that would be simple and accessible. I keep using the word simple. Simple does not necessarily mean easy. So what I decided to do today, I really wanted to get some granulation because the road had a bunch of rocks. It was a gravel road that we were hiking on. So I'm using my Daniel Smith watercolor sticks. I love using these. They're so wonderful. I'm just taking a wet brush directly off the stick itself and pulling the pigment off. I'm using Lunar Black, which is a wonderful granulating color, Hematite Genuine, which is another granulating color, Undersea Green, which is a beautiful green-brown granulating color, Serpentine Genuine, which is another granulating color, and Raw Sienna. And then in my Roman Szmal palette off to the side, I'm using a really warm red and the blue ultramarine to make the purple. And I'm using a little bit of that titanium or Titan buff in there. And so what I'm doing right now is creating the texture in the background. And then I need to let it dry before I go in and try and put the shadows so that I can get some crisp edges. So a lot of this is just waiting for things to dry at this point. And I'm going to go ahead and put in some shapes here and just get these going. As I go back and look at these videos, it's really interesting because I think there's a sweet spot around the 15-minute mark. I typically spend maybe somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes on these 100-day paintings. But there's a freshness around that 15-minute mark. And I think I've mentioned this in other videos that I might want to start setting a timer and just stopping there. I refine them a little bit. Sometimes that extra time is just me waiting for things to dry. Like with this, I really needed to wait for that background to dry. But there was a freshness to the figures at this point that I really liked. The main reason why I kept going was because I know this watercolor is going to dry lighter. And so I wanted to get a nice, rich shadow in there. And I know that I needed to let it dry and layer to build up that depth. So that was my main reason for it. The other thing I'm thinking is I probably could have used a bigger brush. So this I think is a size 8, and this is a watercolor brush, so it's designed to hold a lot of liquid, but I probably could have gone with a bigger brush that held more, and maybe I could have kept some of those looser brush strokes with a bigger brush. So I might try that tomorrow, depending on what I think I'm going to do. The perspective on these shadows is really interesting too, because I took this picture obviously looking down, but we were at an angle, so our legs are elongated, and my head is really small and her head isn't, and because she was in front of me. So it's kind of a fun, quirky kind of perspective. But I just thought the simplicity of the shape was really pleasing, and there was this lighter color transition between the gravel road and the grassy part that was next to us that made this nice arc that from a composition perspective, I thought looked really, really nice. So very simple pattern, very simple composition, very simple color palette as I go through and do this. And so really all I'm doing from here on out, refining those shapes a little bit, lifting some of that color and letting things dry, and then going in and adding more color. And something as creating a simple uniform wash in watercolor, y'all, it's not that easy. And so I was doing my best to get that. And it's really interesting. I'm continuing to use this New York Central watercolor block, which is 100% cotton. Really nice paper. I really enjoy it. But you'll notice in my figure, there's a part that's lighter that I'm really struggling getting darker. And I don't know if maybe I rub too hard and remove some of the sizing there, and that's why it's not the same, or just a variation in the paper because it's 100% cotton. I'm not really sure. But again, I think going with a bigger brush, doing these washes would have been a better choice. So while that's drying, I'm just darkening this foreground a little bit. And I'm using the Hematite Genuine to do the main color. And then I'm using the Lunar Black to do the speckles for the gravel. And then here I was using that Titan Buff to make a softer transition between the grass and the gravel. But it ends up being darker than I wanted it to be. So I go in here with a little bit of titanium white, which in watercolor is not nearly as opaque as you might expect, but it can really help you lighten some of your values if you need to lighten them. So just refining things at this point, trying to get those darks darker. Even with watercolor, it's all about the layering. So there's the speckles with that Lunar Black. And because the shadows are transparent, I wanted some of that speckle to show through as well, to read that these are transparent and they're shadows. There I am fanning, trying to get it dry. Trying to soften that edge. I do love watercolor for so many reasons. It is often simple to fix mistakes. It's not always easy, but simple is the word of the day apparently. But you can lift color, and sometimes you can move things in a way that if it's acrylic, you've got to just paint over it. So every medium has its own joy and its own nuances. Here what I'm doing is I'm just using that brush and making some squiggly marks. I wanted to give it a little bit more interest and variation, and I'm darkening it up a bit. I really love green against purple. I've mentioned this before, and so I like that, and it's not quite so linear, that curve. It's not quite so harsh, that edge. Adding in some more speckles. There's that titanium white, just trying to brighten it a little bit. And it does a pretty decent job. It does what I wanted it to, which is to just brighten it up a little bit. I don't need it to be white to the paper, but it did give it a little bit more contrast, which is what I was looking for. Doing one more wash of that dark color, and I don't want blooms, so I'm doing a wash over the entire figures, and I'm treating the figure as one shape. So if I do a wash in one area, I'm doing a wash over the whole thing so that I don't get blooms. Often you get blooms when you've got part wet and part dry, and the wet kind of leaches into the dry. So if it's all wet, you can help avoid blooms. So last layer of speckles, just to kind of create that transparency. adding a little bit of that purpley color into the top to unify it. Where you use one color, if you use it once, you want to use it elsewhere. So I'm adding a little bit into that upper part. And there we go. There's me in the munchkin. Second day of watercolor. And day 12 in the books. Thank you all for joining me. I look forward to day 3. Who knows what that's going to bring, but I hope you're doing well. Take care. Bye.